Okie dokes, we are live. Okay, so thanks for coming to this meeting. This is our status update on the roads and highways interface and functionality. And it's been a while since we've met, so get everybody back up to speed with what we're doing and how we're doing it and what the next steps are. So first, just let me review what we're doing, just since it has been a while. The idea was to be able to integrate Jackalope with roads and highways in order to have just a single point of truth out there for certain highway statistics. So you might want to manage most of your statistics, or excuse me, I'm saying statistics, I mean site data, basically, site attributes. So you might want to edit most of your site attributes in Jackalope, but there might be some that you would rather get updated from roads and highways, which makes a lot of sense. And then basically those attributes are kind of locked out on the Jackalope side. They're read from roads and highways, and you have an interface that allows you to manage the process and do what you need to do. And just for clarity, let me just be specific here. We say roads and highways all the time because that's mostly what we're talking about, but this is actually hooks to any ESRI service. When we were working with Nevada and Chris, they actually have an existing non-roads and highways set of layers, and so we're actually pulling information from those. We don't actually care what the actual technology is on top of the ESRI services. We just care that it's a service, just as an FYI. So if you have a non-roads and highways ESRI application out there and it's available through their web services, we can use that as well, just for clarity. So there's probably going to be multiple phases of this. The first phase is what we're doing now, and that's pulling site attributes from roads and highways into Jackalope. And so you set up the information, you set up primary keys and foreign keys, and then behind the scenes, Jackalope goes and synchronizes things. And we'll talk about all the details here shortly about that. After this first pass, the other side of the coin is potentially statistics. People have talked before about pushing final ADTs, for example, onto roads and highways somewhere, things like that. That's part of some people's process, and that might be a future incarnation of this interface. And also, we talked about at some point maybe pushing site information, from Jackalope into roads and highways. So maybe there are certain fields that you want to edit in Jackalope, but have that pushed into your enterprise ArcGIS server. So those are things down the road that we will be getting to. We are using it's actually called metadata now, but what used to be called the site metadata interface to control all of this, to do all of the linking, and we'll talk about that here in a second, and I'll show you all that fun stuff. And we're using the Jackalope Web Services, JWS, which is a separate application that allows you to query things directly to the database instead of having to go through the Jackalope user interface. And so that's actually what's responsible for doing most of the heavy lifting of this is the JWS. So technically, you don't even have to go through the Jackalope to play with all the stuff. If you knew how to query web services, you could do it through that. We did create a new interface to manage the process, which we'll be showing, and then thank you, Chris. Nevada has been helping a lot and has been very patient because we've had a lot of delays. Thank you so much. And I'm going to spoiler alert, Chris, I'm going to have to ask for another delay again. That whole domain thing has been good, but it's taken a long time and resources are super thin right now. So I'll send you an email later on specifics, but just FYI, thank you for your patience in that. And when I say volunteered, basically it's kind of the full, what does this actually look like in a production environment, being used. Nevada's a really good test case. They have 5 attributes that they want to update. And we actually ran into some interesting situations that had to be coded around, and which is great. That's exactly why we wanted to do this. We knew that Idaho is not exactly the same as Minnesota, who's exactly the same as Nevada. We knew there would be differences. We had no idea what they are, and Nevada has been great at kind of flushing out a lot of those differences. And so some of the core concepts have changed a little bit since we last met, but I will talk about that shortly. Let me talk about some concepts before we actually look at the interface. How this works is you set up a primary key, like that it's that number or name that you assign every one of your sites. You might call it sequence number or site ID or whatever. Everybody seems to call it something different, but it's that ID that uniquely identifies a site. And you have to set up an attribute in Jackalope that tells you how to use that ID to communicate and get information from ESRI. And then you can set up one or more foreign keys that are sort of, that's the information that you're really trying to update. So, if a county changes or something for a site, and you want to keep that up to date in Jackalope automatically, you would set up that foreign key and using the rules that I'll show you, and you're good to go. And like I said, you can have as many of those as you want. I think we have 5 in Nevada. I can't remember now. And then after that's done, the output goes to the synchronization user interface for you to deal with. So there are some auto synchronization thing, but the general idea is when we first talked about this, we were talking about, well, we should use the events that are triggered from, things being changed in roads and highways, and we'll automatically do stuff based on those events. And I think after our first couple of discussions, we decided that's just not workable for a whole bunch of reasons. So essentially, this can be as manual as you want. It can be press a button, wait a while, and then see and accept or reject, the changes that occur. You can also set it up to do automatic synchronization of attributes that really aren't that super important, and you don't care if something happens with them. You can set it up to automatically do it. So that's kind of the big picture process and how it all works. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Let me talk about metadata real quickly. So some of you have delved into metadata. Metadata controls what attributes you see for a site. So everybody has different attributes that they're interested in with regards to their site UI, and that's completely controlled through the site metadata. And actually, I keep saying site metadata, but we recently renamed it just metadata, because when you guys get version 7, whatever that is next, we have 4 objects that are basically time dependent. So for example, your traffic sites, you can make changes and create a site split, right? And so before the date that you chose, it'll have this attribute, and after the date that you chose, it'll have a different attribute. So basically you have history over time with sites using these site splits. We actually have 4 objects. Most of you don't use most of them. Sites behave this way that I just talked about, so do intersections, so do segments, and so do traffic devices, counters. So they all have kind of the same interface. They all have that timeline at the top. They all run off of metadata, what we used to call site metadata. And that's important for this discussion because of that very thing. Each of those 4 objects are going to be roads and highways enabled. So if you have intersections, for example, and there are attributes in roads and highways that you want to update, you can do that with this exact same interface, just FYI. I don't know if that's something, I think actually we did talk about intersections recently, probably with Iowa, I can't remember. But just FYI, that you can actually manage all 4 of these objects through the same interface. And within metadata, you can have attributes that are just numbers or strings, but you can also have basically list of values like a county. And the county has a predefined list of values, and you have a drop-down list in the interface, and we call those domains. And that's important because we're going to be talking about that here in a second with the roads and highways interface. And then, of course, attributes can either be sourced from Jackalope or roads and highways. All right, let's not talk about that yet. Go back. All right, so let's go here. Let's talk about site metadata first. Actually, I'm going to open up 2 tabs. That's not where site metadata is. And I am going to continue to call it site metadata for the rest of my life, even though the name is now officially just metadata. At the top, and when you get your new version 7, you'll see there's actually 4 things that you can change the metadata for. And that's not what I want to do. I'm going to just go to my test database here. Oh, I should have done primary key first, but that's okay. So essentially, at the bottom of the metadata, and again, this controls all the attributes of your sites. What the thing is called, what type it is. Is it a string? Is it a number? Is it one of those drop-down things, domains we talked about? Is it a derived from something else? Is it a coordinates like Latin long? Those are all column types that your site attributes can be. And there's various things here that are important. In addition to some QC things, if it's a number, can the number exceed this size? If it's a string, how long can it be? Stuff like that. And there's also, importantly, we'll talk about this in a second, information for domains, and how you basically map keys with values. And I'll make that a little bit more clear in a second. And now at the bottom, once you get version 7, you will see, and once you have version 7 and you have roads and highways enabled, which is a system parameter, you will see this section, which normally for most attributes is going to look like this. It won't have much. But for the purposes of this, we're looking at sourcing the information from roads and highways. So again, this information could be sourced here in Jackalope or from roads and highways. There's basically 2 kinds of roads and highways column. There's the primary key, and again, that's going to be associated with your site ID, sequence number, etc. And that's the link into ArcGIS that allows us to pull the correct information. So you set that up first, and when I say you set it up, we'll probably set it up for you, or we'll do it in conjunction. There's not going to be a test on this later. This is pretty complicated stuff, so you're obviously not on your own here. There's potential to have multiple ESRI endpoints. So some states, well, actually Minnesota here actually has 2 endpoints that identify or that contain ArcGIS services that we can query. The actual layer, so this is a list from this URL of all the layers available, and so you would pick the layer that you're interested in. Since we're doing a primary key, it would have to be the station layer. I won't say this because I forgot what it was on, but and then the fields within that, which specific field within that layer are you interested in getting? This is new. So when you query in ArcGIS, you are querying by a spatial location. So what we do is we go get a site from ArcGIS using the primary key, and from that we get some sort of spatial identifier, kind of like a Latin long or whatever. And then we use that to then query all your foreign keys. So we say, we query the county layer, and we we have a point and we say, okay, give me the county that contains this point. And we had default logic for dealing with all of those interactions. So if your primary key, a site, is a point, and you're querying a layer that is area or polygon, we would use what I just said. We would say, does it contain this point? And if it's a line, for example, on a route, I don't remember what it is. It's a different spatial relationship. And so we just had those hard coded before, and it turned out in Nevada that doesn't exactly work. Because there's sometimes just tiny bit of difference between the coordinates in for the sites versus the coordinates, for example, on a route. The site wouldn't exactly be on the route. And so we added the ability to kind of fudge a little bit here. So basically, in the case of what I just said, if there's a site that's slightly off the route, so it wouldn't come up if you said contains or intersects, whatever it is. You can do something instead, like with the within, which is the fudge factor. So within 50 feet, give me the route in my example. Does that make sense? Again, this is all stuff you're going to probably set up once and then never think about it again. But I just want to tell you all this so you know what you can do. The default site action is what happens when a change occurs and you say, go ahead and affect this change. You can either just update the existing site record, or you can create a site split. And this has to be renamed because it could be an intersection split or whatever. But the difference, so for example, if you were managing the number of lanes, let's say that information was in roads and highways. Well, when the number of lanes change, if you don't do a site split, if you say just update the existing site record, any existing reports you have are going to be wrong. They're going to have the wrong number of lanes on there. So in that situation, you probably want to create a site split when the number of lanes change. And finally, domains, the views. So our plan A was that we would make the assumption that so in roads and highways, that if it was a lookup situation, so for example, let's say county, we made the assumption that both of our lookups would be the same. So we already have a lookup in site metadata. When you go to the site interface here, let's just do it. Link. Slow. Well, so for example, this would be a lookup. I wanted to just show you, I guess, I don't know. Okay, well, anyway, so basically, this is sort of an example of a domain that I'm talking about, just a list of values, and then internally we store that in a certain way. The original assumption was that this list of values would match between roads and highways and Jackalope, and we knew that wasn't a good assumption at the time, but we were thinking, well, just for the purposes of the demo, getting this out, getting people to use it, we'll just fudge and say that. And it turned out that was pretty naive there, for a number of reasons. One being our first try in Nevada, there was a mismatch. So we went ahead and shoved this design. We moved it forward, basically. We started that a couple weeks ago, and that's what poor Chris has been waiting on, is this particular fix. So now we have the ability to, or once Chris gets his version, we have the ability to essentially create a different lookup. So instead of using the lookup that is the default lookup for that metadata item, you can basically have a different view that establishes a second lookup. So for example, in the Nevada case, they have a county layer, which has all their counties, or they have a layer that has county information in it, I should say. And but the county is represented as a 2-digit abbreviation for the county. So, WS for Washoe County, which is not what our site metadata was. That it was actually the county names. So that's the reason for this change, and it's way more flexible. And it needed to happen anyway, but that's one of the reasons for the delay is we pushed that up, and it complicated our design a bit. So that's the current thing we're working on. So in general, the things we did for Nevada really, I think, made it more flexible, and I think, yeah, a lot more usable. Having the actually being able to specify the spatial relationship if you want. You don't have to, by the way. It'll fall back to the default. There's a default option here, and when you have default, it'll just fall back to using the rules, hard-coded rules that we had before. But it does allow you a lot more flexibility with pulling information in. Okay, so that I know the site metadata or the metadata stuff's complicated, but I wanted to go over it again just to make sure you knew what you could do. Let's open a new tab. Site. So down underneath all of your other site stuff is the roads and highways synchronization user interface. So it looks like this, and this is where the results of any synchronization occur, or you will see the results here if there are differences. So basically, we go and do the scan. We check to see if any differences occurred, in which case we do one of two things. We either automatically resolve that difference if the auto synchronization is turned on for that column, which that UI is still in development too, but that's basically option A. So if it's an attribute that it's not world-shakingly bad if it gets updated incorrectly, like I don't know, your location text or route label or something like that, and you don't want to have to go through a bunch of records every time someone changes a route name or something like that, you could set that just to kind of automatically sync in the background. It'll still be viewable here. It will be a finalized statistic that you can, that's one of the statuses here. I'll talk about statuses in a second, but so you can see that it was finalized if you ever wanted to look at it later, but that's option A. Option B is if it's not set to auto synchronize, it will show up here, and it'll have one of the statuses here. It will be potentially up. Yeah, so if the value just changed, so if it went from route Main Street to 2nd Street or something like that, that would be a flag of updated, and you would see it here with updated in its status column. If it's flagged, that means there was some sort of weird happening in the exchange. There's 2 flags now. One is if the domains don't match up. So again, this thing I was just talking about, if there's in Nevada, they have, I don't know how many counties, but if someone accidentally puts a typo in there and it's the wrong county name, that will be a flag that you have here. And then there's another one with regards to number of lanes. So a flagged error will show up as flagged here in the status, and when you hover, it'll tell you what the problem was. By far, the most common one will probably be the domain one, I expect. You can ignore change, or let's skip ignore for now. So then the other 2 data flags are, it's in roads. This particular attribute is in roads and highways only, not in Jackalope, or vice versa. It's in Jackalope only, not in roads and highways. And so we kind of distinguish. There's 3 update potentially to update flags. There's just the value changed, the value never existed, or the value exists but not in Jackalope. So those are the three things that you would deal with. And then how you deal with it are either synchronize them, in which case they would be finalized at that point, or you can ignore them, ignore the changes, and that would show up as the ignored flag. And ignored is persistent. So basically, if you run it today and it finds something, you say, I don't care about that, so you ignore it, and then you run it 2 weeks ago, it is checking to make sure, when it finds that difference again, it will continue to ignore it unless you, at some point in the future, unignore it. So that's how that works. In terms of, this is new too. This was not part of the original design. So the filtering box allows you to just filter the list here, the view that you're seeing, based on our new that you'll see in version 7 1.0.7. You're going to see this control a lot. It's in the sitemap, and we'll probably be putting it elsewhere. It's just a stock control that now it takes all of your site metadata and allows you to filter your sites based on any of the site metadata information, as well as site group, scheduler group, or many different data elements. So you say, I want all sites with a site ADT of greater than 100,000 or something like that. That's something you would do here. So and the action will filter this list based on whatever you set. You can also use it to filter what you want to scan. So if probably doesn't make sense for site ADT, but it might make sense if you want to scan only things where your route is null, for example, and you want to do a scan on just those sites. You could set up the filter, make sure this is selected, and then hit scan, and it will scan only those sites with the route ID that is null. So that's a new feature that we didn't have originally planned, but turned out to be important. There are, from an efficiency standpoint, doing an entire scan of how many sites do you have in Nevada? I can't remember now. So basically it's taking about 30 minutes for one attribute for however many sites they have, and it's linear. So okay, so they have 7,000 sites. So if you have 70,000 sites, it would be 10 times longer. So I think there is probably some efficiency concerns that we need to deal with, possibly. We're kind of at the cusp. And so we're just going to have to play it by ear. If in the real world, it's taking 12 hours to do a scan, a full scan, by the way, I'm talking about, not a selective scan where you're doing it, by date or whatever. If you're doing a full scan, we just need to figure out what is too long, I suppose. Is 12 hours too long? Because I expect if you get a state like Iowa with 150,000 sites, and if they have 4 or 5 different attributes that they're updating, that's that's gonna take forever. So we may have an efficiency item on the list, on the to-do list, but we're just gonna have to wait and see.
So Joe, I'm just curious. I would assume that most states wouldn't do the scan all, with the exception of maybe one time. And then they would do a since last run based on how site attributes are being updated, in addition to, for example, the key ones like county. The county codes don't really change frequently. Functional class does on a certain cycle, so this might not be a huge concern.
Yeah.
But I'll let the state speak to this.
I hope
One of the
right
things this would be used for is finding where your staff has made coding errors. So for Minnesota, we would definitely run a scan of all sites for all the selected attributes since the last time a scan was done.
Yeah. So, yeah. So and so if it's just right, if it's just going to return 100 sites, that's obviously not going to take long at all. That sounds good, and I hope you're right, Susie. There's only so much we can do with regards to efficiency. That's one problem we have. We worked on it quite a bit, and it's pretty well tuned. So it's just a generally slow process. We have to go query the primary key one by one and get and query. There's each of these is a web service call. So imagine hitting refresh on your browser 150,000 times. It's just slow. So yeah, let's hope there's not an efficiency problem. But just to give you an idea, like I said, so it is linear. It scales linearly. So with my internet connection and not being in Nevada, 30 minutes to do a full almost 8,000 sites for one attribute, just multiply accordingly. Although you probably get to subtract some because your speeds are probably much faster than mine. Okay, so where do I go? So yeah, so that's where we're at. We dialed in a lot of things in the Nevada experiment so far, and I think we have made it more flexible and easy to use. We have a little bit more work to do. Like I said, we're still working on the domains, Chris. Soon, probably. We're really going to try for Friday, and then there's just some easy UI things to do. You might see some of these are grayed out. Like you can't currently synchronize all just because that's like a 5-minute code thing we haven't done. But so there's just cleanup stuff like that, and then we will, assuming there aren't any more problems that we find in Nevada, we'll be ready to try a different state. So I think our original second, I don't think we had did we have a second place? I'll have to go back through my notes.
I have the notes, Joe. It's Utah.
Okay, that sounds right. And I missed your comment, Christina, or Christy. I'm looking at your name.
Oh, Christina.
Now I'm going to start calling Bill William too if I'm actually looking at the chat. So
I just get called that when I'm in trouble. So
Nina J. Prentice. I have no idea what your middle name is, but let's see. Yes, right. Yeah, and so so basically Christina said, and this is back when I was talking about making the query based on spatial coordinates a little bit more flexible. Christy commented, I can't look at your name, Christina, and say Christy, apparently. She said the same thing of the coordinates of the Jackalope site not being exactly on the LRS route is true for Minnesota, yeah. So they try to maintain it within 5 meters, but yeah. So basically you would also use that fudge factor then. So it was inevitable. We had to do that at some point. And we knew we'd had to do it, so it's good that we did it. And so good. That's pretty much where we are. Does anybody have any comments, questions, suggestions on all of this?
I guess, Joe, this is Susie. I'm just going to say, based on the last comment, our next step for High Desert is to continue our work with Nevada and work through the domain issue and then some cleanup on the UI before we'll step next to Utah. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we should definitely make sure Nevada works well. And then, yeah,
okay.
It'd probably be easier to focus on one thing, one state at a time, I think. and then yeah, move on to Utah from there. And my hope is that we've ironed out most of the problems at this point. I'm sorry, go ahead, Christy.
I'm just wondering, does this create like a process or a batch or something in the background that if it gets hung up, somebody can check where it is, or if we just want to like kill the process and start over?
Yeah, it's just querying the Jackalope web server, which does all the work. I can add that to the list. I don't think there is a way through the UI to kill it, basically. It just sends the request off to JWS and then, waits for it to come back.
Okay.
So yeah.
What does it look like when it's like waiting?
It's the usual Cylon thingy. I don't have JWS up, so I can't press the scan button. It'll crash, but it's just waiting, and it's one of those things where it doesn't matter. You could go away and come back, and eventually this will paint back. You don't have to sit there and look at it, but yeah, having some sort of way to kill it probably makes sense. I will add that to the list. Any other questions or suggestions? How many people are like seriously interested in using this at some point? I know, Christy, you said it originally that Minnesota really wasn't interested in using it. Has that changed, do you think?
I think now that you've developed it to not necessarily have to integrate the two of them together, where it can be sort of a one-way pull of just roads and highways information, it's much more desirable.
Okay.
Especially for attributes that right now I query in ArcGIS, and then I give my staff a list, and updating things like functional class is very tedious.
Yeah, of course.
So that we would definitely, even just to get the list and then to see what does that mean. I think I'm more interested in it than initially discussed.
Okay. And Alan, you guys are also, or Bill, interested? Probably, maybe.
Probably, maybe, yeah. I think Bill would, yeah. We're just so, our GIS staff is so just getting everything ready for Meyer and the just using roads and highways right now. So, I mean, they're busy making sure the network's all up to date. So, I mean, we really haven't really talked to them too much about, how we could use roads and highways and stuff. So, but I think you're making progress. I think that's good.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, great. I guess we can finish early if no one else has any questions and comments.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, everybody have a great rest of your week.
All right. See you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.